Hi, welcome to another SacTV Riverside Chat at the American River. I'm Alex Cosper, and today I want to reflect on November 22nd, 1963. I was only 1 year old at the time. The reason I want to look back on that day is because mainstream media does a pretty terrible job when they look back on that day every year. They really try to relive the tragedy and the emotion rather than get into the details of the actual crime of the century that really was never solved. Just because there was a commission, a government commission to oversee it and to come up with a report on it, giant report, like 10 Bibles stacked on top of each other. It didn't answer all the questions. So what does Sacramento have to do with the JFK assassination? The most powerful man who oversaw the investigation, or so-called investigation, of the JFK assassination was a man who lived in Sacramento during the 1940s while he was governor of California at the Sacramento State Capitol building. And that was Earl Warren. Who was Earl Warren? Well, while he was Attorney General of California, he was involved in the internment program, the Japanese internment program, which he later regretted. He felt very bad about organizing, being involved with that situation of rounding up Japanese people in California who had nothing to do with Pearl Harbor, and they were sent to internment camps, like prison camps. Just to show what a small world it is and how Sacramento plays a big part in that small world, I learned from my 5th grade teacher at John Cabrillo Elementary School in Sacramento. Her name was Miss Greggs, that she was good friends when she was a kid with the daughter of Earl Warren. At the time he was governor of California, which was 1943 to 1953. And then he was appointed U.S. Supreme Court Chief Justice. So he's the one who swore in John F. Kennedy as president. And then after Kennedy was assassinated, the new president, Johnson, made Earl Warren reluctantly the head of the commission that oversaw the assassination. Unfortunately, the Warren report is something he never really apologized for, but he hinted that we would never know the real story or the full story in our lifetime. But Earl Warren did not want to oversee the JFK assassination in any way. He would, for one thing, he was a Republican and John F. Kennedy was a Democrat, and that kind of meant something back then, although there were a lot more overlapping views back then than probably there are now. The Warren report was just paperwork of lots of bland interviews. They interviewed the most boring people they could find that actually had not much to do with the actual murder scene. And they ignored like over 50 witnesses who said the shots came from in front of the limousine, behind the wooden picket fence on the grassy knoll, a shady area that was a vantage point for any sniper that day. It was a better shooting position than the 6th floor of the school book depository, where the shooter had to shoot through trees. It's just incredible, the story they told us, that how much of it has now been debunked. You know, recently the single bullet theory fell apart. But anyway, the more important story is that former President Gerald Ford a guy who was also connected to the Kennedy assassination because he served on the Warren Commission, and he himself faced an assassination attempt in Sacramento at the state capitol in 1975, 12 years later. So Gerald Ford, the most interesting thing about him in the Warren report is that he tried to move the bullet hole in Kennedy's body in the autopsy report to make the magic bullet theory work. So he was off by several inches. He tried to say the bullet entered Kennedy's, the back of his neck and then came out the front of his neck. No, Kennedy was shot in the back and in the neck. And it was an entry wound, according to most of the doctors who saw him that day. So anyway, that alone debunks the single bullet theory and practically the lone gunman theory, because it's logical to say that the president was hit from the front, from the very close vantage point, an assassin's dream sniper's nest, okay, right in front of the limo, okay, just yards away. The fatal shot to the president's head forced his body backward. So that's another way we know that the shot came from the front. Now, there were over 50 witnesses who said the shots came from in front. In November 1997, I went on a road trip across America because I was starting a new job in Milwaukee for Green Bay Packer Willie Davis. I got to program his radio station WLUM, and on that trip I took the southern route from Sacramento to Los Angeles and then to Texas, partly to visit my sister, but also to visit Mr. Ed Lambert, who was my mentor at Quad in Sacramento back in the 80s. He was music director of the station and I was his assistant, and he's the one who taught me about the radio industry. Well, at this point in 1997, Mr. Ed was the program director of the #1 station in Dallas, KHKS, and he advised me to stick around an extra day to attend the anniversary of the JFK assassination on November 22nd, 1997. So that was the 34th anniversary. And when I was there, I got to meet author Robert Groden, whose books helped inspire the movie JFK. And after reading lots of his work, I asked him, personally, I asked, do you think the Grassy Knoll shooter was Dallas policeman Roscoe White? And he said yes. And the reason I brought up Roscoe White is because he admitted in his diary that he shot the president and that he was on the Grassy Knoll. And then that diary was read by his son Ricky years after his death, after Roscoe's death. And then Ricky got smeared by the media when he started talking about it. And then the diary came up missing. And I guess one of the weirdest things about all of it was that Roscoe White died in a mysterious explosion at his work in 1971. And several other witnesses, many witnesses who disagreed with the Warren report, mysteriously died within years of the assassination. And so some people actually have admitted that they were involved in the JFK assassination, and that's what's odd, because mainstream media never talks about that or avoids it as much as possible, and probably because the name Lyndon Johnson comes up. Lyndon Johnson was the vice president. Two people close to LBJ have said that they know for a fact he was involved in the assassination because he talked about it before the fact. And those two people were his mistress, Madeline Brown. Some say she's been discredited for whatever reasons. They usually try to smear people who come forward. The other name is LBJ's lawyer, Barr McClellan, said that he knew for a fact LBJ was the mastermind behind the JFK assassination. And you know who else said that? A CIA agent who admitted on his deathbed that he was involved. And he was none other than Watergate burglar E. Howard Hunt. Yes, there's a recording you can hear on YouTube of him admitting that he was part of the CIA's Operation 40 assassination team to eliminate President Kennedy. And he was a bench warmer, they said. He said. In other words, he was a backup guy in case they needed extra help. But he was in Dallas that day. But anyway, LBJ wanted the case closed. And FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover, he basically wrapped up the case after 2 days after Lee Harvey Oswald was shot and killed by Jack Ruby, nightclub owner, mobster. Yes, he had connections with the mob. And in one other tidbit about Jack Ruby that no one ever talks about in mainstream media, it might be to protect the innocent that are connected with this story. But anyway, Jack Ruby knew, he made it seem that he knew the owner of radio station KLIF in Dallas. And that's a legendary radio station because it was one of the first top 40 stations in America. Okay, Gordon McClendon was the owner of that station, and he was actually the guy on the air reporting about the presidential motorcade as it happened. He was live at the Dallas Trade Mart where the president was going to speak. And then once he found out the news that Kennedy had been assassinated, he went to the station and he took over there and was like the voice you would hear on a top 40 station where that completely flipped to news that day. So imagine that, how different that is. Like, it's very, very rare that a music station would flip to all news now or back then especially. And according to Ken Dow, a DJ at KLIF, he testified before the Warren Commission that Jack Ruby hung out at the station regularly and provided women to record promoters. Jack Ruby also later changed his story that the reason he shot Oswald wasn't what he said initially, which was to spare Jackie Kennedy from coming to Dallas for a trial. He later said, right before his death, that the world will never know about what really happened, and that it was the result of high government officials who were involved. And so fast forward to 2023, still many unanswered questions about the JFK assassination. Too many to go along with the Warren report. Much of it has been debunked because it all hinged on the single bullet theory, which was very illogical. And so we can look at the evidence today and conclude that we were never told the full story.